Hello, Internet. I'm Jackie Fox, and in the last few videos, the conversation has been about political orders, the changing times that we live in, and how, at the moment, Joe Biden is probably the person in the best position to create an antithetical order to the authoritarian to just downright fascist example that was set during the Trump administration, and that continues to kind of exist within lower levels of electoral politics with varying levels of success. Some of these candidates have been rebuked by their voters, and some of them have been embraced. But it doesn't seem like, for now, that this is a dominant movement. Whereas, with recent changes in the way that workers are demanding themselves be represented since the pandemic, it seems like we have a lot more recent momentum towards a left-oriented new era of politics. In the context of kind of the transitional years, the last 5 or 6 years in particular, I remember one point where it had gotten particularly wacky when a bunch of conservative Republicans were passing around the idea that AOC was not only a witch, but gathered together with other presumably Democratic women, I would guess, in a witch's coven to perform a spell on the Democratic Party or to eat babies or whatever these wackos think that witches do. And that was a pretty wild story, but recent events have had me thinking that somehow liberal Democrats have summoned a dark energy to manifest into our universe from an unfamiliar plane known as the Twitterverse. That's right, I'm talking about Dank Brandon and Joe Biden's recent Dank Brandon energy. And I'm not the only person to have noticed this Dank Brandon energy.
It's a fun time to be in Washington because Dank Brandon is just on an absolute rampage. I mean, think about everything that this guy's getting done.
Anyway, let's move on now to the biggest story of the week. Dank Brandon is in full effect.
Yes, he has turned fully into Dank Brandon by now.
Yes.
Someone fed him after midnight. Someone gave him some water when it was too late, and Dank Brandon has rolled out.
And it's this time, thankfully, it's not just memes.
Yes.
It's Dank Brandon
It's policy.
Has been willed into existence.
President Joe Biden isn't taking any more of your shit, okay? He's done.
What's so funny, actually, is, Obama comes in, obviously brilliant with a movement behind him, like a global movement behind him, like the hopes of the world on his shoulders. He's come immediately, just falls to pieces, and decides that they're actually not going to do anything because they're going to spend the first year working with Republicans. They're going to adopt Mitt Romney's health care plan and see if they can get a bunch of Republicans to agree with that. They're going to keep the stimulus too small because you don't want a big sticker shock to the American public. And he winds up with, Obamacare.
He has no reason to be on the defensive, and thankfully, he is not being defensive. He is going on the offensive.
Mr. President, is this unfair to people who paid their student loans or chose not to take out loans?
Is it fair to people who, in fact, do not own multi-billion-dollar businesses that see what these guys get more tax breaks? Is that fair? What do you think?
The White House insists the address was not political, and critics are blasting the president over the tone, calling it dark and divisive. And it wasn't just the words, some noting the blood-red backdrop and the optics of having two Marines flanking the president. Republicans have been tearing into Biden's speech.
The strange and wildly inappropriate setting, the unusual, weird red lighting.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution.
Joe Biden and his student loan forgiveness program dropped this week, somewhat unexpectedly. I didn't think he was going to fucking do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, aside from offering direct financial relief to low and middle income citizens, it also had the bonus effect of just triggering the fuck out of conservatives so hard that they have spent the last 2 days bitching and moaning and malding and crying about it online, only to have their own blatant loan forgiveness thrown back in their smug faces. This you?
Yes.
Now Joe Biden comes in.
But you're
175 years old.
Well,
the hopes of the world not on his shoulders. No.
The disappointment on the world arguably on his shoulders.
I mean, the world was glad that he got rid of Trump. And people were like, all right, your job is done here. Like, you've done your thing. And nobody expected anything from him after that. And it's just been bizarre to watch him just rack up accomplishment after accomplishment, including making Obamacare, like, much less bad.
As you can see, people from around the traditional political spectrum have taken note, either in fear or in support of the Dark Brandon energy. But before we talk about what this means in the broader context of the changing political orders, let's examine the origin of this meme down to its very root, which is this idea that especially very centrist liberals, and this is an idea that's more firmly popular on the right than it is on the far left, but believe me, there are people on the left who believe this as well, that a lot of especially the more centrist liberals are just kind of blind to all of the bad things that liberal politicians do. And it's like a sort of cognitive dissonance where they can't even allow themselves to be aware of it. A lot of memes on the right about this kind of reference doublethink in 1984. So when a presumed liberal female reporter is interviewing NASCAR star Brandon, who has just won a race, the obviously conservative NASCAR audience sees their opportunity to get their viewpoint onto the mainstream news. And their viewpoint is summed up as, fuck Joe Biden. Now, just to cement this meme during her interview, and look, this woman is at work. I just want to say, like, she is working. She is trying to keep her interview productive and safe for television. And people are shouting, fuck Joe Biden in the background. And I think it's actually kind of brilliant that she, like, turns this around on the audience in real time here and insists that the audience is saying, let's go, Brandon. And while this seems like perfectly relatable if you imagine yourself as like, what would I do in her shoes if the audience was yelling something during the entirety of my fucking interview that probably wouldn't be allowed on television, effectively ruining the work that I'm doing right now? Really, I think one of the smartest answers to this scenario is to just plainly ignore what they're doing and reframe it. But that's not how the right saw it. I mean, the people who had been talking for years about how, especially Biden supporters with this 1984 level of doublethink kind of ignorant liberals, this was a perfect example of that cognitive dissonance apparently happening in real time. And like so many things related to a lot of MAGA movements, this led to a lot of merchandising. And this meme of Let's Go Brandon, obviously a substitution, enthusiastically picked up like a schoolyard kid telling their teacher to kiss their grass because technically they didn't say anything wrong and they can't get in trouble for it. So kiss my grass, authority figures. That kind of energy to it. This meme did kind of take off and persist as kind of like the right-wing equivalent of like Orange Man jokes during like 2016, 2017. And just like that joke, the Let's Go Brandon joke has kind of died and fallen out of popularity until it was revived by a group of, by all reports, very like dyed-in-the-wool liberal Biden supporters. People actually enthusiastic about Biden. Maybe a certain level of like fantasy or wish fulfillment, like this is the president that even the liberals really desire Joe Brandon to be, the one that they fantasize about when they're thinking about how great their vote for Biden in 2020 was. This is the Joe Biden that they specifically talk themselves into voting for, I think, in a lot of ways. And there is a certain cognitive dissonance between like the person that is and this kind of fantasy of him. But then the meme kind of broke out of those bounds, and it began getting adopted by people on the right who were trying to turn this into like, you know, Joe Biden is a powerful communist leader and he's plotting in the background and gonna eat babies or something. There's a sense of both force and power to this representation of our president that is not really, or at least wasn't really present within, you know, his run for president or his time as president so far. Not even like the energy that he would have had previously in his career has been present until the Dank Brandon meme started to take off, which was happening around the same time as CHIPS and IRA were being passed, which were seen as big Democratic victories, which were seen as Joe Biden getting some of his campaign promises through. And these two things happening together caused an uptick in his poll numbers. Around the same time, he also hired a youthful and let's say pretty interesting for, you know, being hired by the White House Twitter account person to run a social media manager or whatever the name of that job is, but to run the White House Twitter account. And this has actually paid off when he kind of leaned into the Dank Brandon energy by all means, kind of playing off of that jump in the polls that these things had gotten him, and decided to just go ahead and do what everybody been asking and just cancel student debt without trying to pass something through Congress and make a bunch of deals with Republicans. Just do it already. And he did it. It may not be as much as some of us had wanted, but it was, I believe, as much as he had promised from his campaign promise. So boom, just knocking out a campaign promise right there. And then we have this speech, which a lot of people picked up on across the board as having kind of an ominous vibe. Now, apparently, if you zoom out, the lights are red, white, and blue, and the servicemen standing behind him don't seem so ominous. But when they zoom in on the president during a talk about fascism, flanked by the military with ominous red lighting around him, while it has a certain vibe, it has a very distinct and kind of Dank Brandon vibe. And like, this is a whole speech about how we must stand strong against fascism and all of that. Which, you know, cool. Glad you're willing to acknowledge this. Thank you for taking that very easy position on fascism. But at the same time, you know, you can see how aspects of the speech definitely lean into more of the Dank Brandon vibe. That kind of like, I don't know, like the real correlation to it I can think of is like the Joe Biden in the big sunglasses kind of trying to look cool kind of thing. You know, like kind of that energy, except a little less corny and a little bit more, I don't want to say violent, but like aggressive, powerful, you know, coming from a place of strength rather than like an old man in a suit trying to look cool. And if this is how he's going to go for the rest of this term, I mean, it might actually get interesting. If he really forcefully pushes for the things that he actually promised, and he keeps talking this way in a way that aggressively defends the working class position, this will, if nothing else, help to establish some really positive working class norms within politics that haven't really existed within our political economies since like the 1970s. And it's more than soon enough for these type of trends to come back into American politics. And I would love to see where someone picks up, you know, kind of takes the torch and carries it even further for the Democratic Party. You know, Bernie's getting a little old, but like, you know, just spitballing like Rashida Tlaib would be a very interesting candidate. That's just, you know, kind of like aggressively socialist working class. And I mean, there's many examples like that. I think Bernie is actually getting to the point where he acknowledges that he is just too old to be doing this, and it'd be one old white man handing off power to another. But I really think that he does need to pass the torch instead of trying to change the narrative during a second term. Like, I really wish that he would kind of take the pace and the gusto that it would require to really not count on that second term to get his campaign promises done. Like, I wish that he would treat himself as a one-term president and try to get all that stuff done in a single term. But that just doesn't seem to be his pace, unfortunately, as much as I wish that were the case. But it seems that thing that we used to think was completely impossible, at least the vibes, at least like the attitude of Joe Biden being pushed to the left is here. I mean, is he... Well, I mean, he has some recent actions to kind of put his money where his mouth is. Now, I mean, very easy, surface level, obvious analysis of this could go along the lines of, yeah, primaries are coming up. The Republicans are in kind of an unfavorable position out of nowhere because of the Supreme Court and their positions on abortion. And they're generally seem to be kind of at a crossroads, even within their own party on the issue in a lot of ways, as abortion is proving to be a lot more popular than they had imagined when they were trying to get rid of it. And how he's just trying to capitalize on this to get more Democrats into power in Congress during this next session. And, yeah, that's probably a good strategy for him. You could look at it cynically like that, but think about this as well. If this strategy works, what trend does that set in motion? Like, if he takes it to the left in order to get our sympathy votes or whatever in the midterms, and that works for him in the midterms, what's that gonna kind of push him to do for the next 2 years? If he is actually trying to get reelected, wouldn't that encourage him to keep pushing things to the left, at least in that final year leading up to the campaign for him to run again in 2024? Now, again, I really wish that he would see himself as a one-term president, but that doesn't seem to be the way that he looks at it. Maybe we will have a good primary, maybe someone will upset him, and that will really cement the fact that people want the Democratic Party to move farther left than Joe Biden seems to be willing to go. That would be awesome. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen because parties don't usually squander the incumbent advantage. I mean, did you see many other people really being allowed to run in the Republican Party in 2020? No, because as much as some of them may have hated Trump, they didn't want to lose him the incumbent's advantage. So if we're stuck with him, we might as well give him a reason to pull to the left towards the end of his term, hoping that we will re-elect him. Anyways, those are just some of my thoughts on the kind of changing opportunities that this surge in popularity and why he's getting it for doing things that are pretty good, for enacting America's largest climate change bill, for making sure that microprocessors will be able to be accessible in the future, even with trade blockades, even with shortages and supply chain disruptions, canceling student debt, which was a portion of the Bernie agenda that he added into his platform when Bernie conceded. These are a lot of things that are kind of pushing him out of what was, at least at the beginning of the primary, kind of his Democratic comfort zone. Believe it or not, even those most faithful liberals have been slowly pushing him left. Even his coalition with Bernie Sanders, in the way that he seems to have delegated some of the messaging to him, seems to be pulling him left in the same way that FDR was pulled left. And I remind you that, while it's easy to be critical about him for how much of his campaign promises haven't been fulfilled, there's a whole nother 2 years coming after the primaries. And depending on the way those primaries go, we could see him push a lot bigger and more expansive legislation through Congress and maybe feel empowered enough to continue with some of these executive orders to just knock out more campaign promises. Because I think if he really enacts the entirety of his agenda, then we at least have kind of a start at something like a Green New Deal. And if we can get there, if we can get the door open that wide into the next era, then we can push ourselves through and maybe actually achieve meaningful political change within the American system. Anyways, no matter how I managed to edit out that ending into something coherent, thank you for listening to it. I appreciate you. You make this worth doing. And, you know, it's hard to imagine what other power this humble fox has than to inspire. So, thank you for listening and taking inspiration. I'll be putting some links on the screen if you want to donate to the channel to help things progress and just make my life a little simpler. I appreciate you. You don't have to, though. This channel is for the working class, and one of the unfortunate realities is that, especially with inflation, we don't have that much money shaking around. So if you can't, I completely understand it. But I thank you for your views, your likes, your subscribes. They are the greatest encouragement. Until I see you next time.